These are my suitcase Susies who will use their beauty and free giveaways to make sure our drug is prescribed.
Cool. Are they robots?
No, robots can develop human feelings. We're graduates of Arizona State.
I am the author of Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher. I'm a 15-year veteran of the pharmaceutical industry, and I left in the year 2000. And what I would like to do today is I would like to dispel the myth that the pharmaceutical industry is in the business of health and healing. Because in fact, what the pharmaceutical industry is in the business of doing is disease maintenance and symptoms management. They are not in the business to cure cancer, to cure Alzheimer's, to cure heart disease, because if they were, they would be in the business of putting themselves out of business. And that, in fact, doesn't make sense. So you need to be careful about trying to take drugs in order to remain healthy, because you're never going to have anyone come to you and tell you that the drugs are always tried against a placebo in clinical trials. What a placebo is a sugar pill. And in fact, many drugs are not found to be much more efficacious than the sugar pill. And in a case in point, actually, is the recent clinical trials that were released in the meta-analysis that came out of the UK on antidepressants, on the newer SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants. And what was found was the information that activists and other researchers have known for decades, was that antidepressants are no more effective than placebo, no more effective than sugar pills. But yet there are over 44 million people that have been taking these antidepressants. I spent 15 years in this industry. I was one of the best, but I'm here to tell you that the industry has run amok, that we are at a severe crossroads in this nation, and that we have got to take our power back, and we have got to start making the pharmaceutical industry accountable for their actions and for the defective products that they're putting on the market. It won't be long before every American is affected by this disaster. And we need to be aware of what the differences are between diseases, between disorders, and between syndromes. Because if it doesn't have to be scientifically proven, if there are no tests, if there are no blood tests, CAT scans, urine tests, MRIs, if there is nothing to document that you have a disease, then you in fact do not have a disease, you have a disorder.
So Dr. Snatch and Dr. Bowden say we got it all wrong when it comes to cholesterol by making two fundamental mistakes, and they're big ones. They say the first mistake is believing that cholesterol causes heart attacks. So I'm going to say, I was taught that going through school. I think most folks here probably believe that cholesterol is involved with heart attacks. Why is that a mistake?
Well, first of all, cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Look, half the people with normal cholesterol have heart disease, and half the people with elevated cholesterol have normal hearts. So something's wrong here with this scenario. And look, you need cholesterol. It's vital for our cellular function. It makes vitamin D in the skin. It helps with cerebral vascular function. It helps with neurotransmitter function so we can think better. And it lubricates the skin. So it's a vital component of our lives, and it's protective. You know, it protects people from infectious disease of the GI tract, of the lungs. The higher your cholesterol, the less hemorrhagic stroke. And I got to tell you, the higher your cholesterol, according to some studies in Europe, the longer you're going to live.
You're kidding me. So some are arguing that higher cholesterols are actually better for you.
Yes.
Well, the Framingham study, which is the longest running study of heart disease, the Framingham, Massachusetts, the older people with the highest cholesterol actually live the longest. That's right in the data.
I'm a physician who is board certified in anti-aging and degenerative medicine. I have a practice at Ruby Isle just down the road on North Avenue, and I've spoken a bunch of other times here. We're trying to work on a project that I'm going to introduce tonight. One of our talks is we're going to talk about Wellness University, but tonight we're talking about the great American health scam, cholesterol. But you can basically find everything's labeled low fat, low fat, low fat. And if it's low fat, if you take out fat, what do you put in its place? Sugar. All right. So that's how we got these guidelines. All right, the average American on these guidelines gained 1 pound a year for the next 40 years. We all gained somewhere in the range of about 25 pounds. I gained 60, so I made up for a couple of you who didn't. Okay? And it worked really well. See what happened to our weight loss from 1978 when the guidelines came out? Look what happened to obesity. Pretty good guidelines, weren't they? This is called the biggest public health disaster in history. We have poisoned America by coming out with guidelines and then letting those guidelines seep into our food supply. So those guidelines were utterly, completely, scientifically unvalid, wrong. All right? So we then embarked on a scientific journey over the next 20 years as scientists in America, saying, okay, let's study this. Let's bring some real research. What causes heart disease? So the first four, Honolulu, Puerto Rico, Chicago, and Framingham, not one showed a fat connection. All right? The fifth study, called MERFIT, cost $150 million and $15 million, involved 28 medical centers, screened 360,000 men to find 13,000 high-risk men. All right? The intervention group was told to stop smoking, eat less fat, and exercise. The intervention group had 17% versus 19% cardiovascular deaths, not clinically significant cardiovascular deaths, but overall, more deaths. Overall, more deaths. So, 5 studies, 0 for 5. They had a slightly reduced reduction in 1, so 4 of the 5, 1 had slightly fewer cardiovascular deaths, but overall, more deaths. So that one didn't work. Here's how we started our research, and this is what was the beginning of our research stuff. So the NIH holds a consensus conference and says, let's see what we say. So George Mann, for example, from Vanderbilt and one of the Framingham Heart Studies said, researchers have held repeated press conferences bragging about their cataclysmic breakthroughs. They have manipulated the data to reach the wrong conclusions. There wasn't a consensus in the community at all. There was a wide Castelli, study director of Framingham, writes, who was the study director from the Framingham study, says, in retrospect, the more saturated fat people ate from Framingham, the more cholesterol they ate, the more calories they ate, the lower their person's serum cholesterol. We found that people who ate the most cholesterol, ate the most saturated fat, and ate the most calories weighed the least and were the most physically active. Oh, that's a problem. That's exactly opposite what you all believe the data shows. As you walked in here today, you thought if you ate a low-fat diet and ate fewer calories, you'd weigh less. But in fact, the Framingham study proves the exact opposite. The more fat you eat, the less you weigh. We haven't gotten to cholesterol yet. We're just talking about total fat. All right? How many of you have heard about the Leon Heart Study? The Leon Heart Study was published 2 years before our current ATP guidelines. Was not included or talked about in our ATP guidelines, but it was done in France. Now, my son, David, is living in Geneva, Switzerland at the moment, trading soybeans and corn, and he doesn't even know what a soybean plant looks like. I'm quite distressed by this. And he no longer claims he's from Wisconsin because he says, you know, when you're trading soybeans, Dad, I tell everybody I'm from Iowa. And he says, then everybody goes quiet in the room and goes, oh, really? Okay, so Leon is only about 100 miles away from Geneva, so we go through it when we go on the train when we go to see David. So they found some horrible high-risk patients. They were smokers, they'd already had a heart attack, they had high cholesterol, they didn't exercise, they ate junk food, they had high stress rates. These were all heart attacks waiting to happen. The highest possible stress patients you could get. They told them to eat a Mediterranean diet versus a healthy diet. Okay? And that's what they were told to do. And healthy meant limit fat to 30%, no eggs, no more than 10% saturated fat, and eat a gram a day of fish oil. And they got whole grains and nuts plus 1 gram of fish oil. So basically a Mediterranean diet, lots of olive oil. Study was stopped early. The Mediterranean group had a 76% reduction in CV deaths and more than 70% overall death. 76%, not 0.2 to 0.14, a 76% reduction. But you know what happened? They didn't measure the cholesterol, and they couldn't prove the cholesterol went down. So they submitted this huge article to the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prestigious journal in the world. And you know what the New England Journal did? Turned it down. Said, you didn't measure the cholesterol. That was the meaningful thing, so we don't know what caused it. So they submitted it to the Lancet, got published in the Lancet. So they published it in the Lancet. The Lancet published it. Okay. The Enhanced study, published in 2008 after 2 years of processing results. If a drug company has really good results, do they wait 2 years to publish them? They've only got 17 years of a patent. So if you're spending 2 years waiting, what does that tell you? They're really massaging the data as best they can to get whatever they can get out of it, right? Vytorin. works better than any previous drug at lowering cholesterol. But plaque grew at twice the rate when you look at plaque. It lowered your cholesterol, but what did it do to plaque? Anybody here taking Vytorin? So the question is, how's that working for you? Well, let me tell you what the stock market thought of this study. That's what happened to their stock when that study finally came out. So why did they wait 2 years? Because Merck sort of knew that's what had happened to their stock when this came out. Because that didn't work. Okay, we've now had 4 studies in a row, all of which are kind of big fat duds. So the nurses study. Anybody here participating in the nurses study? That's like 130,000 of you around the country. So there might, anytime I talk to an audience, I always find, okay, not tonight. Okay, there's like 130,000 now. I think when the study was done, it was up to like 85,000. Published in the New England Journal of Medicine. 5 strategies to prevent a heart attack. We can reduce your risk of sudden death 92% if you follow these 5 strategies. Name the 5 strategies for me.
Low fat.
No smoking.
No eggs.
Daily exercise. A glass of wine. Keep up a good body mass index. Get your body mass index to 25. And have a low glycemic, low trans fat, high omega-3 fiber diet, aka a Mediterranean diet. You follow all 5 of these things, your risk of a heart attack drops 92%. Please show me where in these guidelines they show low cholesterol.
Okay, so misunderstanding of health statistics is also a major risk factor for misinformation. So many doctors, surprisingly, don't understand health statistics and therefore cannot evaluate evidence for and against a treatment. So in one study several years ago of 150 gynecologists, a third did not actually understand the meaning of a 25% risk reduction from mammography screening, so screening for breast cancer. Most of that third believed that if all women were screened, 250 out of 1,000 less would die of breast cancer. But actually, when you look at the data, you'd have to screen 2,000 women to prevent 1 death from detecting and saving them from breast cancer. So 1 out of 2,000 is actually the actual figure. And a smaller study that was carried out a few years later, despite this awareness, although many of the doctors asked knew about the benefit not being that great, none of them were aware of the harm. So for every 1 lady that was saved from breast cancer from screening, 10 were harmed by receiving an unnecessary treatment or an operation. So let me just give you a very basic, simple mathematical education on statistics here. And it's not rocket science, and I think this is a crucial part. So there are many ways of actually presenting a benefit, a relative risk or absolute risk, also known as the numbers needed to treat NNT. So if you communicate relative risks, as opposed to NNT or absolute risk, it can actually lead lay people and doctors also to overestimate the benefits of a treatment. So let me give you an example. For people with type 2 diabetes, the published medical literature tells us that if you take atorvastatin, a cholesterol-lowering drug, 10 milligrams every day for 4 years, there's a 48% relative risk reduction in having a stroke. That sounds quite impressive. You're 48% less likely to have a stroke if you take 10 milligrams of atorvastatin every day for 4 years. But what does that actually mean when you look at the data? Well, it means you reduce the risk of having a stroke from having no treatment, no statin, from 28 in 1,000 to 15 in 1,000, which means there's an absolute risk reduction of 1.3%. So what does that mean for the individual in real terms? The actual way to say to that patient is if you take atorvastatin 10 milligrams every day for 4 years, there's a 1 in 77 chance that the drug will prevent you having a stroke. Very different to 48% relative risk reduction. Most people do not benefit. The benefits are small, but you may decide that that benefit is good for you, or you may decide it's not. It's very different. Now, mismatched framing in medical journals that we rely on to give us information about benefits and harms of medications has made the situation worse. So if treatment A reduces a risk of developing a disease from 10 to 7 in 1,000, but increases the risk of the harms from 7 to 10 in 1,000, the journal article would present the benefits as a 30% relative risk benefit or reduction, but the harms as 0.3% when they're exactly the same thing. How common is this? Well, one analysis looking at articles, a third of articles, in fact, published in the BMJ, JAMA, and the Lancet between 2004 and 2006 use mismatched framing when presenting information on the benefits of a drug and the harms. It's extraordinary. This is not science. This is marketing. And this asymmetric presentation of, obviously, benefits and harms was going to lead to overtreatment. It's going to exaggerate the benefits of a medication and reduce the risks or the perceived risks. And by the way, this is all still best-case scenario. I'm going to go further deeper into this as well shortly. So don't just take my word for it. The man considered probably the world-leading researcher in health literacy in Berlin, Gerd Gigerenzer, he said in a World Health Organization bulletin in 2009, it is an ethical imperative that every doctor and patient understand the difference between absolute and relative risks to protect patients against unnecessary anxiety and manipulation.
When all is said and done, the over-reliance on these statin drugs to reduce our risk for heart attacks and strokes will go down as the greatest medical hoax in the history of the world. It's just appalling, and it's just amazing how we've all been misled by the drug companies' propaganda with these statin drugs, and that's what it is. It masquerades as research, but if you look at the research, these drugs offer very little protection for most people. 80% of the people that are taking these statin drugs are taking them for no good reason.
I think this country has the finest bureaucratic regulations in the world, and the other countries are way behind. Here, the patient has to go to very difficult bureaucratic process, which usually most of the patients will not be able to go through because they die during the process. For some reason, they don't want to have cure of cancer.
He died because there's a government institution that disseminates false information and is not looking out for the welfare of the people. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I swore an oath 11 years ago, and I think most of us in this room swore it at one time or another to uphold the Constitution. It says life right in the beginning.
Testimony on Dr. Brzezinski's behalf came from Dr. Nicholas Petronas, a Georgetown University expert who was a member of the National Cancer Institute's team that analyzed 7 of Dr. Brzezinski's cases.
The basic conclusion was that in 5 of the patients with brain tumors that were fairly large, the tumor resolved, disappeared. It's amazing. The fact that they are living, it's impressive and unbelievable.
He was quite a witness. He said he had never seen anything like what Dr. Brzezinski was able to accomplish with his anti-neoplastons in brain cancer. He had one young boy there who had been treated. He was about 12 at the hearing, strapping lad, good-sized boy. But when he was first started on treatment when he was about 4 years old, I think his name was Paul, he was given up on by his original doctor.
The state of Texas wants Houston doctor Stanislav Brzezinski to stop treating his patients with drugs he produces at his own pharmaceutical plant. The drugs called anti-neoplastons are non-toxic compounds of proteins and amino acids, often lacking in cancer patients. Even though the state of Texas acknowledges that the drugs may be helping some who are terminally ill, the state says the drugs shouldn't be used. This is the State Board of Medical Examiners, which licenses doctors in Texas. This is the agency challenging Dr. Brzezinski in court. One judge has already told the board members that they don't have a case.
All of this nonsense which is there now should disappear, because they should realize that I am right, okay? They're fighting losing battle. I am saving human lives, and if they put me out of business, the people will die.
This is the brain of an 8-year-old boy with a huge tumor most thought would kill him. He used Dr. Brzezinski's drug. Images of his skull taken 6 years later show the tumor has almost disappeared.
Dr. Bruce Cohen is the director of neurologic oncology at the prestigious Cleveland Clinic.
The only explanation is that it shrunk because of the therapy Paul has received.
He confirmed Dr. Brzezinski's results on Paul.
7 years that we've had Paul, and he's been healthy, and I owe it to this man. And there's no way that I'd ever be able to thank him enough for what he's done for us.
My name is Sergeant Rick Schiff. I'm an 11-year veteran of the San Francisco Police Department. I hold the department's highest Medal of Honor for bravery. That used to mean a lot more to me than it does now. What I'd like to talk to you about today is my now 7-year-old daughter. This is an identical twin. Her sister is now dead. Her sister, when she was 4 years old, Kristen, developed a highly malignant brain tumor that had spread throughout her spine and her brain. The doctors told us that we had really two options: take her home, let her die, or bring her in for massive dosages of chemo and radiation simultaneously. In either event, she was going to die. They were quite certain of that, and very quickly. Believing her only chance to be the standard route, we gave her the chemo and radiation. It burned her skull so bad she had second-degree burns and her hair never came back. To change her diapers, we had to wear rubber gloves because her urine was so toxic and it burned her. At the end of 6 months, miraculously, she survived the standard treatment, although there was a high expectation she wouldn't. She still had cancer. We were told, sorry, we've done everything we can. Now she's going to die, probably within a couple of months. My wife and I, choosing not to accept that, started reading. The first book I picked up, the third chapter, discussed Dr. Brzezinski. As you may guess, I have some expertise in fraud. In fact, I'm quite certain there are enough attorneys in the room that I could be vordeered as an expert in fraud. And I conducted my own investigation. I have no doubt the man is not a fraud. 18 months later, we took my daughter off the anti-neoplastin. She had not died. She had no signs of tumor. She remained free for 18 months of cancer. Within a month, the cancer was widespread in her brain. We put her back on Brzezinski's. By the way, at the objections of our doctors, for some reason felt that it had failed her. We put her back on. Within 9 weeks, the tumor was completely gone. She died last July of neurological necrosis. Her brain fell apart from the radiation. The autopsy showed that she was completely cancer-free. Out of 52 cases of that disease ever, no one died cancer-free, just Chrissy. So she didn't die of a terminal illness. She died of my inability to care for her properly, and she died from bad advice.
The Texas State Board of Medical Examiners, which has fought to suspend Dr. Brzezinski's license because his treatments have never been approved, says, quote, the efficacy of anti-neoplastons in the treatment of human cancers is not of issue in these proceedings.
It takes a bureaucrat to come up with that idea, because a layman, that would really be the question.
Well, Dr. Brzezinski has won his latest round in court. The medical examiner's order was reversed, but that is not expected to be the end of his trouble with the state of Texas.
The Texas Medical Board took this case all the way to the Texas State Supreme Court, leaving the Texas Medical Board completely unsuccessful in their efforts to remove his medical license. So, if efficacy was not an issue, and Dr. Brzezinski wasn't breaking any laws, then why would the Texas Medical Board continue on with this empty pursuit? Well, it was eventually realized, even by the mainstream press, that the Food and Drug Administration had been pressuring the Texas Medical Board to continue trying to take away Dr. Brzezinski's medical license. On March 12, 1976, FDA Bureau of Drugs Director Richard Kraut states in the cancer letter, when anyone other than large institutions ask permission to conduct clinical trials, you want harsh regulations. Sometimes we say it is proper to hinder research. And once these guidelines were adopted, the FDA would consider itself bound by them. In 1982, Kraut states again, I never have and never will approve a new drug to an individual, but only to a large pharmaceutical firm with unlimited finances.
Dr. Brzezinski's dealings with the FDA commenced in 1983. At that point, the FDA commenced a civil action to try to close the clinic and stop all patients from receiving the medicine.
Before the judge in this case had announced her ruling, the FDA sent her a letter warning her in advance, if this court declines to grant the injunction sought by the government, thus permitting continued manufacture and distribution of anti-neoplastons, the government would then be obliged to pursue other less efficient remedies, such as actions for seizure, also known as raiding his clinic and home, and condemnation of the drugs, also known as a propaganda campaign, or criminal prosecution of individuals, also known as throwing Dr. Brzezinski in prison. Regardless of these threats from the FDA,
the judge in the case basically said that he can treat anybody he wants in Texas, but he can't ship his medicine in interstate commerce. The FDA viewed that as a failure and told Dr. Brzezinski's at the time, his attorneys at the time, that they have other ways to get him. Let's talk about the other ways. In 1985, the FDA convened a grand jury to hear evidence to try to indict Dr. Brzezinski. In connection with that, they had a raid of his clinic where they seized 200,000 pieces of paper, including all of his medical records of all patients. A little difficult to practice medicine when you don't have medical records. They presented the evidence to the grand jury, no indictment. 1986, they come back, seize another 100,000 documents, no indictment.
I just have real trouble in knowing how much pain and what people go through with cancer. And since 1967, you've been saying, I can take care of that, and people are going, forget it, don't pay any attention, and you've gone outside the country and they say fine, and here we say no. Are we that backward, doctor?
Yes.
Well, what do you mean? Yes. Are we that backward?
Yeah.
Part of your problem that the treatment of cancer is a very profitable industry for a lot of companies, and that your treatment right now will eat into those companies' profits. And
Bingo.
They'll do anything to suppress you.
1990, another grand jury, either the second or the third. They present more documents. Dr. Brzezinski testifies extensively before the grand jury, no indictment. 1991 to 1993. FDA investigates Dr. Brzezinski. We don't know if evidence was presented to another grand jury. 1994, another grand jury, no indictment. 1995, another grand jury. This grand jury started in March of this year. On March 25th, I believe, it was Dr. Brzezinski, along with a few of his patients, appeared on CBS show this morning.
Let me play devil's advocate. Here you all, very desperate folk, had undergone some cancer treatment, correct?
No.
None at all for you?
I
None
had
at all
no
for you.
treatment.
Let me go after these guys then for a second. Had undergone some treatment. Could it not have been that the treatment that you received prior to Dr. Brzezinski's treatment was what, in fact, really cured you?
Well, I'll jump on that. No way, because the recurrence I had was in a brand new spot that had not been involved before. So if all the punishment that I went through for the year went out of my system, and after it went out of my system, all of a sudden a new tumor comes in, how could that first treatment have helped the subsequent tumor?
Later that day, the FDA came, another raid, more patient documents, more subpoenas.
Upon the commencement of the FDA's 1995 grand jury against Dr. Brzezinski, an oversight and investigation subcommittee was organized by Congressman Joe Barton in an attempt to intervene in the FDA's relentless harassment of Dr. Brzezinski and his patients.
In my opinion, you have every right to use the investigative authority and the judicial resources of the federal government through the Justice Department to convene a grand jury. That's very appropriate. The first time, perhaps even the second time. It becomes questionable the third time, the fourth time, and the fifth time. It is not, I think, an unlogical conclusion to think that the FDA has a vendetta against Dr. Brzezinski or wants to retaliate for some reason. Now, that's my opinion. How many grand jury investigations have to occur that result in no finding of fault before you, as commissioner of the FDA, would encourage those within your organization to cease and desist?
Chairman, how do you know that there were no findings of fault that were returned from that grand jury?
There have been no indictments returned.
Mr. Chairman, I asked counsel to comment, but I don't think those are the same. As a matter of law, those are the same things.
I'm baffled by the splitting of hairs here, but
I'm just trying to understand the exchange between the witness and the chairman. What I understood the chairman to say is that there have been 4 grand juries convened?
At least 4.
I just am left then with a rather strong inference that if you convene 4 separate grand juries and there's no indictment returned, notwithstanding that prosecutors tell us always that it's possible to indict a ham sandwich, that probably there's not much there.
On November 20th, 1995, Dr. Stanislaw Brzezinski was indicted. Brzezinski was charged with 75 counts of violating federal law and fraud. If convicted, Brzezinski would face a maximum of 290 years in a federal prison and $18.5 million in fines. Dozens of Dr. Brzezinski's patients who had traveled to Washington, D.C. from all corners of the United States stood up and expressed their outrage with the FDA and Commissioner David Kessler.
The FDA has made a list and decided who can live and who will die. I guess I didn't make that list.
I've had no chemotherapy. I've had no radiation. I chose Dr. Brzezinski instead after a lot of research and a lot of searching. I've been in remission since 1989. Dr. Kessler, I'm not a statistic.
We're frustrated. There are rights, constitutional rights have been violated. This has got to end. My children are asking me, Daddy, what does the future hold? My one daughter wrote a letter to the president of this country and said, please don't pull the plug on my daddy. And that just broke my heart and broke my wife's heart.
My husband is a walking miracle. 16 months ago, the doctors told us there's nothing else they can do, and they told us to enjoy what little life he has left. Look at him. He biked 32 miles after being on Dr. Brzezinski's treatment for 2 months, and they're saying we can't have it?
I have a report from my family physician which tells how well I am doing. My tumors are leaving my body, and my condition is improving every day. Now the FDA is saying to me, no, your doctor is a criminal, he should be put in jail, and he needs to be shut down. This is criminal.
I want the FDA to get out of our lives and stay out of her doctor-patient relationship.
What the classical conventional medicine had to do for me was nothing. For me, the next thing was the minister. I did not want to undergo chemotherapy, which I had a new name for, killing therapy, or any type of radiation. I was extremely lucky. I found Dr. Brzezinski, and I don't want the FDA to take this right from me. I came 18 years ago from communist Romania, and the tyrannous dictator Ceausescu never stopped a doctor from treating anybody. How can we have something like this in the United States?
When Mary Michaels took the stand on behalf of her son Paul, she trained her eyes on the state's attorney.
I mean, I have enough to worry about when I go to bed at night about my son and my family. I don't need to worry that this treatment's going to be taken away.
What do you think might happen if... Oh, never mind. Never mind.
If you look at Dustin right now, he's a happy, healthy 4-year-old who has outlived his prognosis. There is no traditional treatment that would have kept him alive with such good quality of life. FDA Commissioner David Kessler loves to grab headlines as a man who loves children so much. He wants to protect them from the ravages of smoking. If Dr. Kessler loves children so much, why have he and his agencies been trying so hard to cut off my son's last hope for life? Without this treatment, my son will die.
The issue of whether anti-neoplastons work may not even come up during the trial. The judge says that's not relevant, but the defense contends that's exactly the point, that what was done in developing the drug and administering it was done to save lives.
This trial cost the American taxpayer $60 million, while costing Dr. Brzezinski over $2.2 million.
I don't know why Dr. Black is not telling the truth. We conducted 12 phase 2 clinical trials under strict FDA supervision in every one of these trials. We have objective response to the treatment. We proved that treatment works. that even can cure incurable brain tumors. The patients can live not only over 5 years tumor-free, but over 10 years tumor-free from the types of tumors where chemotherapy can do absolutely nothing. This is well documented. This was reviewed by the top specialists in the United States, but it was never reviewed by Dr. Black. He didn't review even a single case treated by us. More than that.
Why are you not
we
open
treated
to...
patients whom Dr. Black advised do not come to us 11 years ago for incurable brain tumors. Her tumor was gone in 2 months. She's now 11 years later in perfect health, living here in L.A., and Dr. Black told her, you'll be wasting time and money coming to Dr. Brzezinski.
Why are you not as a good doctor? Why are you not open to this?
Well, actually, I'm open to anything that would benefit my patient.
My oncologist, the radiologist, the MRI guy, and everybody we talked to said, he's a quack. You should not do that. I mean, he's dangerous. And we basically said, well, we did our research and this is what we want to do, and you can't do anything for me, so why not? Well, it's not good. It's not smart. It's a fake. It's a scam. He's going to take your money and you're not going to get anything. I mean, it was everything that you'd hear from someone that didn't know anything about it but really didn't want to do it. So, but
one doctor told Susan, if you were my sister and you wanted to go to Dr. Brzezinski's clinic, I would stand on the runway in front of the airplane to keep you from flying to Houston. He got a little dramatic about it.
We had actually asked the endocrinologist at MD Anderson about Dr. Brzezinski, and he told us he was a quack and that there was no evidence that worked. But at that point, it was like, well, yours doesn't really work either.
What is AstroTurf? It's a perversion of grassroots, as in fake grassroots. AstroTurf is when political, corporate, or other special interests disguise themselves and publish blogs, start Facebook and Twitter accounts, publish ads, letters to the editor, or simply post comments online to try to fool you into thinking an independent or grassroots movement is speaking. The whole point of AstroTurf is to try to give the impression there's widespread support for or against an agenda when there's not. AstroTurf seeks to manipulate you into changing your opinion by making you feel as if you're an outlier when you're not.
I first tried it because other kids were trying it. When I feel real bad about something, it was a way of getting to feel better. It seemed everyone I knew was taking something.
There have been no indictments returned.
Mr. Chairman.